As the Washington Commanders open their 2024 NFL training camp this week, the offensive line stands out as the single biggest issue threatening to derail growth this year. But it's not the only issue that needs to be addressed. That and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for CommanderGameDay.com, a part of Sports Illustrated's family of sites, here with you every Monday through Friday. Greatly appreciate you coming through today, everydayers. I appreciate you coming through every single day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. If you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to today's episode, where we're going to talk about some recent news surrounding the defensive line. We're going to dive into the mixed bag of public opinion about just how good or bad this Washington Commanders team will be this season. But first, as we get set to turn the calendar towards training camp or into training camp, we're going to address the state of the Washington Commanders. If you want to discuss this episode, anything else Washington Commanders related, or you have questions you need answers to, you can text me directly by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders today. Become a Locked On Commanders insider. From there, you can text me. I can text you. We can talk about ball. We can talk about news, rumors, all of it, inside information, bonus content. And we actually just kicked off this last Saturday our first Zoom exclusive to insiders. So a bunch of insiders and myself, we got together on a Zoom conference, just chatted it up for about 30 to 40 minutes. So if you want to get in on the next one, we're looking at this next Saturday, actually, of doing our next one as well. No downloads, no hashtags, no apps. All you need to do is text me. I'll text you. I'll send you links, do all that good stuff. Again, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders to become an insider today. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. It's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And we thank LinkedIn for being today's sponsor, title sponsor for today's episode. The state of the Washington Commanders. Overall, I think everybody would agree the Washington Commanders are in a much better situation right now than they were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, so on and so forth, right? But I wanted to go over the state of the Washington Commanders, and this is really focusing on football. Obviously, there's many layers to the state, quote unquote, of the Washington Commanders and what we could talk about, but we are going to stick to the football field with training camp coming up this week. So I kind of pulled from the State of the Union address, right? Politics is a very hot topic right now. It's an election year and there's all kinds of news going on. Don't want to dive too deep into the politics here on a football podcast, but I did draw some inspiration from just the political arena. State of the Union address every year is intended to talk about the important issues going on in this country, along with offering ideas to address them from the president of the United States. And I'm not the president of the Washington Commanders, so take that for a grain of salt, but that's kind of how we're going to approach this. I'm going to identify the three biggest, in my opinion, issues facing the Washington Commanders on the field right now this season and some ideas for getting to the answers that we need to start solving these riddles, as you were. And issue number one, the offensive line, right? Who's the starting five? And then is that starting five going to be good enough to give Jayden Daniels the platform he needs to have a successful rookie season? Or if, for whatever reason, Jayden doesn't start the beginning of the season, can they protect Marcus Mariota enough to allow him to come in and do some damage as a veteran starter while the rookie gets ready? So how can you go about addressing this? And yes, there's free agents out there. You can potentially try to find a trade partner. But honestly, if a team's got a starting left tackle on their roster, they're not looking to trade him at this point in time. So you got some free agents out there, but they've already done their due diligence on those free agents. I would believe if they were going to bring them in, they probably already would have. Now, it's a never say never situation. Obviously, the more information they learn about the guys they have on ground, if they don't maybe build as much confidence as they want to, perhaps they go still talk to a guy like David Bakhtiari, stuff like that. But ultimately, I think you're going to have to really hone in on the teammate one-on-ones, pads, no pads. You know, you have some pass rush opportunities. The joint practices are going to be really, really big for this group. And for me, I think you need to incentivize winning or losing, right? You but it's almost like the drumline scenario, right? You have a left tackle, Cornelius Lucas, Brandon Coleman, who those are the two that we all kind of assume are mostly battling it out for this starting left tackle job. Tell them, look, you're going to be the left tackle till you lose a rep. You lose a rep, you get out of there. The other guy gets to go in. He's going to go till he loses a rep. Eventually, you're going to find out who the most consistent left tackle is, right? Teammate one-on-ones. Don't just put, first team Cornelius Lucas, your first team left tackle, first team right defensive end is Dorrance Armstrong Jr. You're going up against each other. No, you let Dorrance go up against Cornelius. Let him go up against Brandon Coleman. If you really think Trent Scott could be that starting left tackle, let him go up against Trent Scott. Usually in these scenarios with these one-on-one pass rushes, we kind of see the like guys go at it. Like Deron Payne is going to go up against, I don't know, Tyler Biadasz or Nick Allegretti. And that's pretty much going to be the matchup. Each time each guy comes up, they're going to face off against each other. Mix it up a little bit more. And, there is a little bit of mixing up as it goes. But for the most part, you tend to see very similar or the exact same matchup. So mix it up, get the other guys involved, start really pressing the issue of let's find out who's better. Let's find out who's more capable, especially when you get to those joint practices. The New York Jets and Miami Dolphins are two teams that kind of are known for having a very solid or really good pass rush unit. Get those guys mixed in there. Don't just have Brandon Coleman go up against one Jets defender and do it 3 times and see if he can win 2 out of the 3 to get bragging rights. Forget about bragging rights. You want to get Brandon Coleman against as many Jets pass rushers as you possibly can. Same with Luke. Same with Trent Scott. Until you figure out these guys, same with these interior linemen, left guard position. I know we talk about the left tackle position a lot, but left guard position needs to be figured out as well. The rest of them, I feel like they're pretty much figured out. I know some of you want to see Andrew Wiley challenge for his starting job. I get it. I just don't think it's actually happening. But if it is going to happen again, mix it up. Get these guys in there against as many people as possible. And even with no pads, like I said, incentivize this thing. Make this thing have consequences. You lose a rep, you're off until the other guy loses a rep. And again, I mean, if you come away with it, you're like, man, Brandon Coleman had 75 first team reps. Cornelius Lucas had 35. Clearly, Brandon Coleman was a more consistent first team left tackle, right? So again, that's just my ideas, just some ideas for how this coaching staff can go about answering that question. Issue number 2, cornerback number 2, Michael Davis versus Emmanuel Forbes. And I know most of us already have Michael Davis penciled in there. Some of us have Michael Davis cemented in there, stamped in metal or whatever it is, blood sealed and all this stuff. But the team still has not determined who their second cornerback is going to be. And if you watch OTAs, if you watch mandatory minicamp, you see them. They both get burned with that first team unit. So clearly they're still trying to figure this out. So how do you figure that out? You go at them. You go at them and you go at them hard. I'm telling Marcus Mariota. I'm telling Jayden Daniels. I'm telling Sam Hartman. I'm telling Jeff Driscoll. I'm telling the quarterback coach, David Blau. I'm telling everybody, if Emmanuel Forbes or Michael Davis is on the field, we are looking to go after them. In fact, I might even have a period or two where I tell my defense coach, hey, dude, we're going to go after these guys. So we need to set up some looks here. Let's script some looks and really get these guys looked at. Go at them as hard as you possibly can. Opponents are going to go at them. We saw it last year. Emmanuel Forbes on the field. Opponents are going after Emmanuel Forbes. So you have no business not going after him in practice. If Michael Davis is going to potentially be that better, that improvement, that replacement, you have no business not going after him as hard as you can. Again, put him against Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Luke McCaffrey, De'Ami Brown, Jamison Crowder. They need to see every single type of wide receiver you have. Do some motion and get Ben Sinnett out there. Do some motion, get Austin Eckler out there. Do as many things as you can to stress these dudes out. And again, joint practices come same thing. But joint practices, what's really going to be interesting is watch Aaron Rodgers, Tua Tagovailoa, whoever the quarterback is for those teams during joint practices. Watch how they attack your players because they're going to tell you what they think of your players by how they attack them. Decide which one you can strategically support the best. That's kind of the thing is like the opposing quarterbacks may go after Emmanuel Forbes more than Michael Davis. And in theory, you say, well, clearly you want Michael Davis on the field then. But how you can strategically support each guy is just as important. So that's going to play a factor into it as well. Issue number 3, how much risk is too much risk for quarterback Jayden Daniels? We've already heard Joe Theismann talk about how he doesn't think that Jayden Daniels should or will play any preseason snaps. I've gone on the record saying that I see where Joe's coming from, but I do think Jayden's going to play some preseason snaps and, in fact, could benefit from it. I've seen some people, some Commanders fans, say he needs to play every single game and he needs to play as much as possible. I've seen people say he needs to play one drive every single game. The ideas vary from person to person, but I think you need to create benchmarks. What do we need to see out of Jayden during training camp, during practices, during the preseason to feel comfortable about rolling him out as the starter? If you hit those benchmarks, be satisfied. You know what I mean? I think the biggest thing you can do is try to go too far, try to push too much, try to prove too much in a period where nothing is really proven. So create those benchmarks for the quarterback. As he hits those benchmarks, call him done, move to the next benchmark. If you get to the end of the road, look, if you see everything you need to see out of Jayden Daniels to feel like he's your starting quarterback, before you step on the field week 3 in the preseason against the New England Patriots, sit them. You have nothing left to gain if you have no more benchmarks to hit and everything to risk. So I think that's the best way to kind of create risk management here. If you're looking for Washington Commanders expectations, you've likely been reminded of the popular children's storybook Goldilocks and Three Bears, because people are hot, they're cold, they're just in the middle. The coverage has been wild this offseason, and the perception of what the Washington Commanders are going to be has been all over the place. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games. And the fewer games we get, the more sports stop sportsing the way that we want them to. We got an NBA Summer League. It's not quite the same thing, but it's a little bit of something. But the good news is FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I've got to do is open my FanDuel Sportsbook app, dream up any bets that I want to anytime I'm in the mood, and I've got sports action. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up every customer with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. New customers right now, you can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. And on Sunday, there were multiple profit boosts that you could stack, including one 30% profit boost for any to hit a home run wager and a 30% profit boost for any 3+ leg same game parlay in a Major League Baseball contest. And you could stack those bad boys. So head over to FanDuel.com, start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Vast differences in opinions of what the Washington Commanders are going to be in the 2024 NFL season. I'm reminded of the Goldilocks fairy tale or children's story mixed in with a little bit of Inception, if you remember that movie, that Leonardo DiCaprio movie. So that's how I think of this Washington Commanders offseason. Continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, everydayers. Thanks for coming through today, like you do every day. This week, we are doing our episodes day of. So Monday's episode dropping on Monday. That's this one. Tuesday on Tuesday, Wednesday on Wednesday, so on and so forth. You get the picture because we got things going on. Tuesday, we got a press conference with Adam Peters and Dan Quinn. Wednesday, we got our first practice training camp all the way through Friday. And then Saturday, we don't have a day of practice, so we're talking about doing that insider Zoom, like I mentioned. In the meantime, if you need more sports coverage, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day, streaming for free 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Why is there such a wide gap in expectations for the Washington Commanders? That's kind of a question I've had kind of rolling around in my mind. I think typically when you look at the sports scene, and I've been covering NFL teams or NFL divisions or the NFL in general in some way, shape, or form since the 2015 season. That was my first season really kind of paying close attention to the league. But typically when you talk about a team expectations, most people have the same or similar expectations. Like the San Francisco 49ers, there's not a lot of teams that are like, man, they're probably drafting top 5 next year. You look at the Detroit Lions, there's not a lot of people who say they're shoo-ins to make the Super Bowl, but there's a lot of people who say they're definitely going to be challengers. You look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and there's a lot of people who say, yeah, they've won 3 straight NFC South Division titles. The Atlanta Falcons are the better team. The Buccaneers are going to be fighting for a wild card spot. There's obviously differences in opinion from some people. There's going to be outliers. But for the most part, the overall narrative tends to be the same. For the Washington Commanders, the narrative could not be any more different depending on who you're talking about. Just this past week, or just who you're talking to, just this past week, Colin Cowherd on his show predicted the Washington Commanders to be a wild card team in this year. Meanwhile, Tom Pelissero of NFL Network, who's filling in on the Rich Eisen show for Rich Eisen, basically said he didn't know what to make of the Washington Commanders this year. And then his producer, I think Chris is his name, basically said that he thought it was inevitable that the Commanders were going to be drafting top 5 in 2025. Literally, those 3 examples right there from just 2 different shows show you the wide range of opinions circling around the Washington Commanders. And there's me, who I did a preseason or a season projection here before training camp. Basically, I had Washington winning 9 or 10 games and winning the division only if the issues that arise or that live in Philly and Dallas rise to the top and cause them to have some serious problems this year, especially when you consider 4 of the last 7 games this year for Washington are against Philly and Dallas. If those issues come up to the surface, by the time Washington gets to them on their schedule, these 2 teams could be in the middle of imploding. So it'd be really interesting to see how it works out. So why is there such a Goldilocks and 3 Bears and then in the Atlantic and the analytical environment around the Washington Commanders? Honestly, I think it's kind of similar to grading drafts, right? And we talked about this during the draft season. So every day as you've been here since the NFL draft, you know my opinion on draft grades. Draft grades really are not a solid way of really evaluating how much talent a team brought onto their roster, because these guys have not taken an NFL snap yet. They hadn't even by that time taken a rookie camp snap yet, right? Let alone an actual NFL snap. So really what we're doing is we're telling people how much we agree with what the team has done or is doing. And I think this year, the reason we see such a wide spread in coverage and expectations based on the coverage of this team is there's so many changes, right? Like you take these three groups, the hot group that thinks the Washington Commanders are just going to be the bee's knees, the cold group that thinks that same old Washington, same old Commanders, same old, see you early on day one. And then the middle group that says, they can be competitive, but they may not be great. They may not be terrible. Guys like me who are kind of on the fence, right? And I think that you have to look at every single hire, right? Adam Peters is really the only hire that everybody is like just through the roof about. Everybody is on the hot end of this thing, right? So if you put stones in this, like every Adam Peters stone is in the hot side. But then you have Dan Quinn. And you have some people who absolutely love Dan Quinn, thought he was a great hire, loved the experience, loved the Super Bowl pedigree, all that stuff. And they put that in the hot. Then you have people who are in the cold and say they don't want to retread. They're sick of the guys who've already had their chance. He's already proven he can't win the big one because he made it, but he didn't win it. Those are the cold zone. Then you have guys in the middle who say, man, look at all this experience he's got. If he's really learned from it, maybe there's something there. Same thing with Bobby Wagner. You got guys who say he's a Pro Bowler, future Hall of Famer. Why wouldn't you want him in your locker room? Some guys would say, okay, but he's not going to play very well. So leadership or not, he's going to cost you on the field. Guys in the middle who say, let's wait and see where he's at. I mean, and the list goes on. Dorrance Armstrong Jr. There's people who think he could be a Pro Bowl defensive end with the Washington Commanders. People who think that there's a reason he was a backup in Dallas and they're going to fail because he's a starter now. People are in the middle who say, you know what, with Deron Payne and Jonathan Allen, he doesn't have to be all that. Jayden Daniels, we already know there's a hot, cold, and middle zone of opinion on him. The offensive line, whether or not the team did enough. We just talked about that. And there's people who are still pounding their fist, angry when the team didn't trade up in the first round, didn't go after David Bakhtiari. There's ones who think that the players that they got were really great. I know people who think Brandon Coleman's going to be an all-pro 3 years from now. And then, of course, we got the people in the middle there. How bad the coaching was in 2023. Was the coaching so bad that a lot of these defensive players, Emmanuel Forbes, Benjamin St. Juste, they basically deserve a full-blown pass because the coach staff was that bad? I know people who literally think Emmanuel Forbes this year, you will see first-round talent out of Emmanuel Forbes because he's got a better coaching roster than last year. I know some people who say Emmanuel Forbes already a bust. They should just cut him before training camp. And then, of course, again, like I said, you got guys in the middle. And so because you have all these varying abilities to agree or disagree with something or some things the Washington Commanders did this season, I think that's why you have the overly spread out opinions of and projections of what the Washington Commanders are going to be. If you're hot on Dan Quinn, hot on Bobby Wagner, cold on Dorrance Armstrong, hot on Jayden Daniels, middle of the offensive line, and middle of the bad coaching last year, you probably think they're going to do pretty well. If you're the flip, if you're cold on Dan Quinn, cold on Bobby Wagner, cold on blaming the coaches last year for the defense, cold on Jayden Daniels, you probably think they're going to be pretty bad, which I'm guessing that producer from the Rich Eisen show is pretty much on all those sides of things. So I think that just because there's so many varying opportunities to have differing opinions of what this team is going through, that's why you see that wide scope. So I just wanted to address that before we get to training camp because I just found it really intriguing. I think it's just kind of a narrative of how people are driven by their own opinions. Speaking of opinions, Montez Sweat had some opinions on what happened when he was traded from the Washington Commanders. We'll talk about that and the news update about rookie Jer'Zhan Newton, defensive tackle for the Washington Commanders. Coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role you're looking to fill, and that's why you need to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. But LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but are open to the idea of taking on the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours of posting their job. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a new feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier. and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses are using LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Some news coming out last week, at the end of last week, about Johnny Newton, Jer'Zhan Newton, and about Montez Sweat. We're going to catch up on those news items. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And we're going to get to Johnny Newton first. So Washington Commanders officially placed rookie defensive tackle Jer'Zhan Johnny Newton on the non-football injuries list. Now, the non-football injury list non-football injury that we're talking about is that surgically repaired foot, the opposite foot of the foot that he had surgery on before the NFL draft, which was a known to everyone injury that he suffered while playing for the University of Illinois. After the Washington Commanders drafted him, brought him in, their in-house medical team got a really good look at him, did some more scans, all those things, found a similar foot injury on his opposite foot. So he had surgery on that. He's been recovering from that. It's called a non-football injury because it didn't happen while he was in the NFL and it didn't happen on an NFL field. So even though it happened playing football, right, for the University of Illinois, because it was outside the NFL, it's considered a non-football injury. The good news with that is there's no timeline. There's no minimum time they have to keep him on there or they have to take him off of there in so much time or else he's out for the season. None of that kind of stuff. So they can continue to work him on or work him back at a reasonable pace. No specific timeline has been put out by Dan Quinn or the team yet. Probably won't be put out at all until he's just boom, one day we're to show up and he's out there for practice. Hopefully will be sooner rather than later. Certainly everybody's looking forward to seeing Jer'Zhan Newton getting on the field. Then we turn to a defensive lineman that used to play for the Washington Commanders and former Commanders defensive end Montez Sweat sat down with the Athletics' Dan Pompei. Dan Pompei did a really good story on Montez, talks about his family, talks about his history, his background, his time in Washington, all kinds of stuff, what motivates him as a person. So I highly recommend you go read it if you haven't already. But of course, the part that caught the most attention here in Washington was when they started talking about the trade from the Washington Commanders to Chicago Bears, in which Montez said that, quote, "I was shocked in disbelief," end quote. He also said, quote, "I was very emotional. I was angry and probably said some things I wanted to take back, maybe," end quote. And he was talking there about having the conversation with Ron Rivera. So we knew about this when it happened last year, but basically Montez had just left a meeting, was headed to the next phase of the day, and basically was told, "Hey, don't go where you're going. Instead, come over here because you've been traded to the Chicago Bears." Ends up talking to Ron Rivera, and we don't know what was said in that meeting, but on Montez basically saying he was angry, emotional, probably said some things he wanted to take back, but they all said maybe. So maybe he doesn't want to take them back. Either way, Montez was not happy to get traded. And I remember talking to him the Eagles game before he ended up getting traded, and the rumors and the speculation and all that stuff was obvious there. Just talking to him just about getting traded, possibly, he was not very happy about it. He continued on by saying, quote, "It felt like somebody kind of gave up on you, like you aren't good enough anymore," end quote. And that part really, really bothered me, man. Because at the end of the day, Tez is a really good dude. And Tez was never a guy that went out there and sandbagged. He was never a guy that went out there and didn't try to do his best of what he was being asked to do. So to know that Montez felt like that organization, and it may be one person, maybe a group of people, it just may be a general statement, but whatever it is that he felt like he was giving up on, I think that is the suckiest part of the whole ordeal, because I don't think he deserved to feel that way. Now, at the same time, you can look at it and say, I mean, you got traded, all these years later for a second round pick that was, very close to the pick you were drafted at in the first place. It's actually a really good return for a football player. So it kind of shows what people think of you. But again, that's outside narratives and all that. So that's stuff that we talk about, but living the life and living the experience. You've been pouring in your blood, sweat, and tears for all these years for this organization, trying to get better. And then boom, they just pull the rug out from under you and send you somewhere else. But fortunately, he's starting to feel good about where he is in Chicago, or he is feeling good about where he is in Chicago. One last quote that Montez let out, quote, "In Washington, everyone was kind of like an alpha male and they were great players, but it was hard for guys to make sacrifices for all of us to be of one accord. Chicago, we don't have that problem. We all work together," end quote. And doesn't that just bring the whole thing full circle? We've been talking for years about how this defensive line in Washington was just four dudes doing their own thing, nobody working together, nobody helping each other out, nobody playing off of each other, just four guys trying to make their own way and be the superstars. Now you hope that maybe Deron Payne and Montez or Jonathan Allen, the two guys that remain, were not those guys specifically, or at least weren't the worst of those guys specifically. But Tez, didn't necessarily specify, and he probably wasn't just talking about his guy Chase Young either. So I don't know. We'll see how it turns out this year. Obviously, this coaching staff much more about the unified front, much more about the teamwork, much more about everybody helping each other out, and much more about making the play that helps set up the overall play, not making the play that makes you look sexy and helps you get a bigger paycheck at the end of the day. So we'll see how that influence rolls down to not just the defensive line, but the entire roster. So some interesting news about Johnny Newton, some interesting words coming out of Montez Sweat. Coming up tomorrow, we will be talking about the press conference with Dan Quinn and Adam Peters ahead of training camp, as well as some things we're looking forward to on the first day of training camp practice. That's all coming up. So make sure you come back for that. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, throw them down in the YouTube comment section or text me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders today to do that. Don't forget to check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 live streaming sports channel on YouTube. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming back every day like you do. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, and we will see you back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.